Hello, my name is Josh, and this channel is dedicated to my calling, which is to bring forth an inspired vision of humanity that is superior physically, spiritually, and socially. This vision unites us as one human family and views the individual as valuable as the whole. I believe if we could choose to not sacrifice our fellow humans' quality of life for our own, then we could build a global society like no one has ever imagined. So if you're tired of giving the only life you have to a disposable system that pits man against nature, brother against brother, and nation against nation, all for the profit of a few while the rest of us struggle, then let this be your lifeboat. This is our chance to build something great. This is Communitas Christi. Welcome home. All right, guys, so today I wanted to get a little bit into the technicalities of the vision for the community itself. And the best way I know how to do this is going to be kind of analyzing how we live life right now. And this is probably going to be the first of many videos as to this subject. And so here we go. So the beginning of living is we kind of need a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food in our stomach. As I was thinking about it, I was getting up to making this video, I started realizing that there's kind of two different classes of people in America, and I know there's people that would disagree and want to divide us into 1,000 camps. I just don't see how the rest of us are going to profit from that type of thinking. As a matter of fact, I think it's more to the division that's got us in this state to begin with. So trying to minimize the division as much as humanly possible to maximize the value to all of us. I'm looking at us as two categories. It's basically the people that live on the margins and then the people that work, that actually make the margins, but they don't get the profit, they don't get the margin itself. And I know this is going to strike a lot of people as more Marxist thinking and whatnot, and unfortunately to try to label something as Trump or Marx is kind of a blanket statement to say that over 100 million, or I don't know how many people were into Marx. I imagine probably over 1 billion by now throughout history, but he's had time, but it's the same concept. You can't turn around and say that so many people can't have any valid ideas. There's got to be something in everything that gets a large amount of following, and you're welcome to disagree with me, but I think it's a very strong position to take that, the 100 million plus people that really support Trump or liked him at some point as a president, as a political figure, and the possibly up to 1 billion people or more or less that, looked at Marx with reverence or still do, you can't just turn that as a bad thing. So you're going to have to listen to what I'm saying to see if there's any merit to how what I'm proposing. Anyways, there's people that live on the margins and people that make the margins. And what I mean by that is there's people that look at there's a class of people that basically we're trained to get a house. And when you look at it a little bit different, you start realizing that the rich get rich by managing debt. And by managing debt, you have to make money on debt, and that's where you start making margins. Most of us, when we go to a job, when we go to work, we're actually building a margin for somebody else. They're paying us a percentage of that margin. If you don't make a margin for your employer, ultimately, in 99% of job situations, you're out of there. There's very rare exception to that. Even when, it's a personal assistant, secretary, and you don't see that you're making margin, you're saving the person who's making the margin or managing the margin so much time that you're actually making a margin onto yourself just by doing silly stuff. You could be bringing coffee and making profit for the person who's hiring you. So everybody's out there working for the margin, and then most of us are out there working for the margin. Some of us are living off of those margins. There's nothing wrong with that, and the system's going to continue the way it is, and I didn't have a better solution, I would encourage everybody to try to figure that out, become, economically literate, and if it was simple and there was no other option, there was no problems, then I would pursue that and encourage that. And although you're going to hear a lot of thoughts dealing with a community that are communistic in nature, the truth is about the community is division. The best I can explain it, and it stinks, and that's why I'm going to have to make many videos to get into details of what Communitas Christi is all about, is capitalistic communism. And the best way I can describe that massive contradiction is taking the best principles from both worlds, and leaving the trash behind. I would say that probably we have everything we want split into those two visions of life, and the people that have split, I'm not even saying it's a conscious decision, but definitely seems to be, there's a class of people that do exceptionally well in this world and have been doing well generationally, and not even necessarily families. I'm going to make a point against that as well, which is an anti-communist argument technically. But there's a power structure that different families can move within and without, but the structure itself is stable over time. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it obviously can be bad. So, we need to analyze these things. And that's not what this video is about. This video is about everybody else who's, doing and not necessarily happy and not necessarily getting anywhere and not necessarily feeling fulfilled. That's egregious. That's a crime against humanity when the wealthiest nation on the world, which in some sense so many other nations are busting their butts and living under a kind of economic imperialism that is not all bad. Everything has two sides. The form of economic imperialism that we're benefiting under as Americans has brought a massive stability and growth to the global economy in a way that we don't have documented in modern history. So, that quote imperialism is also bringing everybody else up, but we're starting to see cracks in the system, because if everybody in China is working twice as hard as on average as everybody in America, then everybody in America can't sustainably make like 10 times more for doing not as much work. And, in Russian, people probably bust their butts. They have a lot less resources up there in the north. We're a very fertile country. Then, India is another example. They're not freezing cold. They've got resources. They probably have population to resources problem, but those people are working incredibly hard. Most of our vegetables, a lot of our vegetables, fruit come from Mexico and South America, Central America. Those people tend to work a lot harder than the average American has to work, who then in turn can buy piles and piles of fruit, and we throw the stuff away in the garbage like it doesn't mean anything to us because we're not out there working to do that. That's not sustainable over time. I don't care what your economic theory is. At some point, the global economy is going to evolve to fix that, because that's the nature of capitalism. Meanwhile, it's really wasteful and degradatory to humanity, and again, the richest country, and we have some of the highest rates of depression and suicide. So it doesn't work. Capitalism raw by itself is obviously wrong, and we can also look historically and see communism's obviously wrong. So I'm going to have to argue from both sides of this to get my point across, and I want to gain as many people as possible. I want to get this idea and vision across to as many people as humanly possible, because as far as I'm concerned, this vision's for you. This vision's from our source. I don't want to go into detail past that, out of respect for everybody's right to believe what they want to believe, but in my vision, this is from our Father, and so then I'm trying to make these videos so you can see it, so that we can move forward as a group. For those of you that are like-minded, I don't want to lose anybody over things that are political in nature or triggering, as it were. So anyways, let's get to, do we own anything? Capitalism, one of the biggest and really one of the hardest lines of proponents is that we get to own things. And, well, I mean, is that really a thing? So, like, what we really technically are getting is a right to use, whether that be abuse or improve. And then there's two versions of that. There's the utilitarian capitalistic version of improving, and then there's the naturalistic version of improving. And often we destroy the naturalistic value of land to improve it, utilizing or capitalistically. Like if we're turning a patch of woods into, and that even sounds degradatory, but we literally need the woods to survive. But if we have a patch of woods and we turn it into a plant, now we're doing a lot of economic or ecological damage, but we've done a lot of economic good. And obviously that plant is going to have almost 99% of the time will have a lot higher value after becoming a plant than it did as just an empty lot or woods. So, the theory is that we're going to own this, but then we die, and we're all going to die as far as we know. And this means that we don't technically own it. We have the temporary rights to it, and one of the other rights we have is to kick people off of it. That's unto itself limited, because then the government has different ways they're allowed to come on there, so on and so forth. In a lot of very restrictive areas, there's laws against actually protecting the right to own. So like people literally can come on your property, take your stuff, leave, and you're not allowed to do anything but call a government, which basically has a huge percentage chance of not getting there in time, not recovering, and not arresting the person. So basically you get the right to do nothing. You get to make a phone call that's supposed to make you feel good, and that's the end of it. You got to watch your hard-earned stuff go. So in many places in America, there are presently laws enacted that essentially take away or heavily make it very hard for you to even own the things that otherwise the courts would say you definitely owned. If you and the person who's stealing from you were sitting in court, the judge would say that's yours, you keep it. But that's when the system's working. So we don't get to own things. The old joke, the old adage, I never seen a U-Haul, I never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul. So we don't get to take the stuff with us. And then some people would say, and I'm going to point out anti-communist point. Lots of communist thinking is like, well, yeah, there's generational wealth. And it's like, man, that's temporary though. Statistically, that's temporary. And, people argue, Musk, Bezos, and maybe the Walton family. But statistically, using the Waltons, for example, their kids, so this is 3 generations, are going to be struggling. If not all of them, most of them, statistically, will pretty much be broke again. Now, all of us alive that are complaining and trying to survive, we're either going to be very old or we're going to be dead by the time that happens. So it's not in the conceptualization of most people, but it's already a historical fact. Wealth lasts on average 3 generations. And part of the problem is once you amass an amazing amount of wealth, there's a degradation of the character traits that first got that wealth. So the way Musk thinks, for example, and the way he's living his life, working like 70 plus hours a week forever now, his kids are going to get raised in this bubble of immense wealth, but they have firsthand experience of watching their father intimately. As they get older and they eventually find people, they settle down, they have kids. At some point, the grandbabies are too young, too rich, and too disconnected from the guy who did it. So then, 3 generations, statistical, you can look it up. So wealth doesn't even stay within a family. If it gets into a family by chance, then, it's going to disappear anyway. So this is an argument for capitalistic. Now we're just doing a free-for-all, though, and I don't know if that's our honest, best option for humanity. And there's another huge problem is the population. I've heard it described as population inflation, but basically what it means is population collapse. There's not going to be like 2 generations from Americans are going to be like a third amount of the people that are here today, being born, growing up. Everything's it's plummeting down. I don't know the exact numbers off top, but the point is that we live in a disposable society, and the argument is that we get to own stuff. And that's not 100% true, but when they make everything to break, you really don't get to own things. You're technically leasing resources that are going to end up in a landfill. This is terribly destructive and wasteful. They have, and this goes, I was thinking about it earlier, like the original generation of refrigerators, maybe not the original, but right when they tuned them in, they got them figured out and nice. The first mainstream generation of functional fridges like we're used to today, they have outlived like 4 generations of refrigerators. You can still find fridges running on original equipment from the 50s, and you'll see refrigerators that are like 7 years old going in the dump today. So maybe less. So, that's a fact. We can make better, but we don't make better because we're not making for the theory of ownership. We're making for something called quarterly profits. Now, this is part of the degradation of our society I complained about on my introduction with our disposable society that we live in. I said degradation of society. It's both. It's a disposable culture, and it's degradation into the human experience here on Earth. So population inflation basically means that we don't own all this other stuff. It all breaks and goes away in the dump. So the only thing we really own is our property and our house. Well, that's really not worth anything anyways. And I'm sorry for all of you that have put all your nest egg and all your energy into your house. The older people, don't lose me yet. You need me more than the young people probably do. Although I think the need is overall pretty equal as far as what the community vision is. But anyways, it's you better figure something out if you're an older person. If you're like young old, then you might be in trouble, because if you've replaced yourself, as it were, I'm sorry, but most of your people haven't. What that means is for every couple that's getting towards retirement age, assuming you've had the same amount of kids as was the couple, so it's 2 to reproduce, that means you had 2 kids. On average, those aren't the numbers. We have a declination, the beginning of a sharp declination in population. Well, that means that the only thing you had that was worth anything, which is the house, isn't really worth anything, because who's going to be competing for it in the future? We're going to watch real estate prices go down. We've built enough housing. People are complaining about not enough housing. Well, it's because so many people are trying to squeeze into a small place, and a lot of those people are miserable there and need to just move. I don't understand how we can have these massive regions of so many miserable people. There's so many cheaper places to live. People just don't want to pack. They're scared to pack up and move. They'd rather stay and suffer, and that's insanity. That's a form of insanity, and that's another indication that our culture is really askew. It's not serving the individual, and it's really not serving the whole. It's serving the few at the cost to the whole. So, anyways. So the concept that we own something really isn't there. So the premise of capitalism has failed us, Does that mean the premise is wrong? No, I think the community is going to try to build things that last forever. We're trying to make things that never have to be thrown out. We want to design a new generation of appliances and niceties, robotics, whatever we're using, in a way that profit's not our concern at all. We're doing it for... Well, my personal thing, I'm doing it for God, but for the community standard is we're doing it out of reverence for the earth, because we're doing it for the benefit of our fellow man. If we keep making electronics that break, look at our supply chain, look at where this stuff comes from. And then we have so much abundance that the average American is throwing away a phone every 2-3 years. There are human beings suffering day in and day out trying to make these things as quick as we throw them away. Why don't they get their own phone? When do they get to come home after a long day and lounge and get on their phone and complain about how hard their life is? They don't even know how luxurious Americans have it, and then it's not working for us, so then we're miserable on top of it. It's such a waste. So we can have things that last. We can make them ourselves, design them to last. I'd love to. I think Communitas Christi, as time goes by and grows, will be a great place for fired engineers. There's actually young engineers out there that have made things too well against instruction. I guess maybe they might not be the best engineers, but I don't care. If they got fired because they weren't working with planned obsolescence, I would love to have them on board. They can be our engineers and design our appliances. One of the things I've always had a vision of was taking reverse engineering, finding old stuff that still works, disassembling it, and then designing the new after it. And I believe in aesthetic. I mean, I think you can make a toaster frame, just as one small example. You can make like a toaster frame out with a thin, maybe paintable, preferably powder coated so it could last, and just make all these color plates. So if in the future you want to switch up the look of your kitchen, you could just swap the plate of the toaster. The internals stay the same. We can have a bunch of springs pre-made. We can have a bunch of heating elements that's easy to replace, designed to replace, easy to replace. I've fixed a bunch of stuff that's not designed to be fixed. That's just how my mind works. So I'm talking lived experience. I've saved a ton of money. I've been able to live a very decent quality of life. I'm doing well financially now, probably the best I've ever done, but I'm also 41, and that tends to happen as we get older and we gain more life experience. But generally speaking, I've lived very personally satisfying and, to my standard of what's important, a very high quality of life on a very low level of income before. And so I know how to squeeze a dollar and still have plenty of day left over, for yourself. I've experienced it personally, and I want to experience it on a group level. I want to share what I've got, my vision, with more people. And, if the idea is wealth, we can have wealth. And if the idea is ownership, we can have ownership in the community, as a group. We don't need to have individual ownership. And I know there's a lot of technicalities that opens up. I shouldn't even open that can of worms towards the end of I'm trying to get this video wrapped up. But again, this is going to be one of many videos. And ultimately, all I can tell you is about, well, who gets to stay and who gets to, who gets to decide what. Ultimately, I don't actually know these things. This would have to be probably like from the first community to vote out. But ultimately, everything's more tribal, more village-like. And there's going to be, we're trying to live decent, and we're engineering a world where internally we can all have abundance. And so then we don't need to be so stingy. And we need to really start looking at each other with intentions. Everybody can't do what everybody can do. But when people are trying their hardest, we really need to give them grace. And I don't see how, if someone's putting in 100% and their 100% is half of your 80%, that's fine. But couldn't you humble yourself that if all you got to do is put in 80%, that maybe you can split the difference of what you make? And I'm not talking about with government oversight, and I'm really not talking about money at all. I'm talking about the actual spoils, the resources, the plants, the food, the beautiful things we make. Would you be so against hooking up your brother or sister who wasn't born with as much gifts as you, like helping them live more equally to you, especially if they're working so hard, especially if their intention is there? So, and I mean, that's internally for the community as a standard, but it's also something externally that we can all look on and share with each other. So I'm going to try to wrap up on that, or I am going to wrap up on that. Try to look at each other with intentions, try to judge each other with intentions, and specifically maybe, and I'm not trying to open that can of worms, but if it's maybe a political division, instead of looking at what you see, try to look at what they see. I'll leave it on this. This is a good summation. Something I came up with a while ago is I honestly believe if we wanted to just eliminate, and I also think if we worked on it at all, we would naturally eliminate the two-party system. It's more about control and dividing us than it is about benefiting us as individuals. Experientially and from my observations. You can disagree, comment on if you disagree with that, but basically is if you wanted to be a liberal in government, or if you want to be a liberal in government, or Democrat I should say, if you want to be a Democrat, you have to farm a whole year. You have to go out to rural America somewhere. You can go to the Northwest where it's like all blue, but and the farming area out there is red because farming by nature is a red thing. So go farm for a whole year out on your own, out down a dirt country road. Realize why people believe in hard work will give you, your money, your fruits of labor. See why people don't want the government's help. They don't have the government's help. There is no government help when you live by a small town, outside of town, down a dirt road. You're kind of on your own all the time. So someone knocking on your door trying to regulate your life or trying to, take money from you when they're not giving anything back is going to become offensive. You'll see why people think the way they think when they live that lifestyle. And then on the other side of the political spectrum, I would say anybody who wants to be a registered conservative can go ahead and work in, like, I guess children and family or whatever. I was thinking about kids in the city, inner city. Work with the damaged kids. Work with the welfare system. Work in the inner city. Work in the massive cities of America that are, mega centers of wealth and commerce, and they're very productive on paper. Go into the bats. I go into Southside Chicago and work a year as a caseworker. And I think that once you see what kind of problems we have in the heart of civilization in this country, I think you would start experiencing what kind of makes somebody feel more like a liberal. And anyways, I think that would soften the heck out of the parties. I think if all of our conservatives had to do that for a year and all of our Democrats had to do farming for a year, I think that would totally revolutionize politics over, within the course of a few years, within a generation or two of politicians. Anyways, that's my final and attempt to be positive when I'm covering all these heavy thoughts and issues. Until next time, one love. This is Josh with Communitas Christi signing off. Peace.